Okay, so this video is designed specifically to talk about part of the final project, which is called the Enumerative Bibliography. And we've been sort of working on this already. So your enumerative bibliography will lead into your annotated bibliography. And your annotated bibliography is the second major assignment due at the end of the third week. Both the enumerative bib and the annotated bib will show up in the final project. So you'll have time to revise them so that you can get more credit if you happen to lose points for whatever reason. The first time I see them, they'll show up later. I want to talk about the enumerative bib first because it really, I think, clarifies some of the points of what an annotated bib will do later. Next week, you'll get more content on annotated bibliographies, the purpose, the format, and all of that. But it's a good introduction, the enumerative bib, to how do we gather information, and it really allows you to think about where you research, how you research, and how you format your material, as these bibliographies are often graded for content and quality of presentation. So it shouldn't take an incredibly long time to make this video. And again, the enumerative bib only shows up in the final draft and the final project. But we'll be developing it as we go forward. And so that's why we're discussing it today. We're going to start here with the actual assignment sheet, which will be posted to Moodle today. I'm just making sure that I write that down, post assignment sheet. So this is what it looks like. Your enumerative bib will be on Citizen. So this is the last book that we're going to read of the two. We're reading Ada Limon right now. So you need to make sure you have this book, or it's going to be a very difficult time for you to actually do the project. So if you want to start early with your enumerative bibliography, this is the text you're going to be doing it on. So I'm going to stress that to you a number of times. So first of all, an enumerative bibliography is a way to see the research that you've been thinking about conducting. So it's the kind of first step toward how you're going to better understand something that's a little bit more complicated and with a little bit more information involved with it. So we're basically using research, that we always use research whenever we do something, as simple as if I'm looking up the name of an actress from a television show, that's research, right? I'm just trying to get more information about something that I've encountered that I don't know everything about yet. So there's a lot of ways that we can take this path. The enumerative bib really just asks you to find what's available with the research, and then to present that back to the reader, myself in this case, where I will then go in there and start asking you to, follow up in certain directions, or tell you that I think you're a little heavy on this type, so let's look at for something else. I'll talk about source validity. All of these things we'll cover either in this video or the ones to come. It's my kid. I'm sorry if you can hear him. He's having a rough morning. So we're trying to find critical reading and direct it toward finding and conducting quality research. So the first thing we need to do is we need to read the book we're going to work with, though there are some things we can do even before that when we're just first encountering it. You have to find multiple sources and multiple areas of research. And you develop a research paper for the text. If we were to be writing this particular paper, which we're not, but if we were, this would be an excellent first step to take. So it's a good way to kind of get your research out from under you. It cuts out some of the work you have to do at the very end of the semester when you're trying to write a research paper in your more traditional classes. If you put that off for the last 2 weeks, you have to do a lot of work. This is meant to kind of help you think about it as you go forward with this one. We're looking for complete, unbiased, and a critically responsible approach to a complicated text. So we're trying to find as much information that would be really helpful. So there are research areas from every area of the book, beginning, middle, and end. This is a great way to think about Citizen with your research. You're not going to write about the whole book directly, but you're going to look at a certain section to help it understand the text as a whole. But you still want to find research over the whole book. This shows that you've read the whole thing. Really, we don't want to hear your argument if you really don't know what you're talking about. That seems to make sense, right? How can you make an argument for what this book is if you haven't read the whole thing and kind of looked into every point? So that's one of the things I'm looking for in terms of grading, is that are you actually discussing the text as a whole? Can I see that? Every area of the book, beginning, middle, and end. Quality research, it's books, refereed journals. I'll show you where those are. Reliable news sources. These are qualified. That means they have been peer reviewed, and all that means is that people have gone through them and made well, basically fact-checked them. That's what we want, fact-checked information. It's gone through a series of edits, unlike a blog post or Wikipedia, which requires absolutely nothing in terms of its validity. You can just post it. So we're looking for quality research. That also includes when it was published. So typically we want something that's relatively new, and not necessarily 2020, but definitely by the turn of the century, because just thinking and knowledge and science is all, adapted and moved forward. So we want to make sure we're pretty much where we need to be. These are the areas for your research. Author bio and background. So sometimes this is really helpful to have. If we know a little bit about what our poets, what they talk about, some of their perhaps other texts that they've written, or if they've written lectures, or they have some YouTube videos where they're talking and giving interviews, that's a really helpful thing to think about. So typically, I think of these as interviews are really helpful in this space. You can also think about book reviews are really helpful for this space. This allows us to kind of see what the book is dealing with. And we can kind of have that more information. You want to use this pretty sparingly. You don't need a lot. Remember, whatever you show us about the poet, you're arguing that if we have that knowledge, we will know more about the book. So make sure that there's a one-to-one correlation. We have to be careful that we don't talk about what the poet wanted or what the poet meant to do. We don't really know that unless we have a video of them just saying it, and then we can include that, but then you're not really coming up with an interesting argument. You're just repeating what they said. Still, we're looking for some information. We use it sparingly, but it can be helpful. This is always really helpful to think about. References and allusions are more interesting than author bio and background. So to give you an example here, there's a lot of references in the book Citizen, so that's something to really think about. I'm not going to go very far into the text, but I want to show you something. Here, there is a picture here. It's kind of hard to see. It's on page 6. It's a picture of a stop sign in Georgia called Jim Crow Road. That is done by a professional photographer. So I could go in many different directions with this in terms of my research for reference and allusion, which is that I can look to see who this photographer is. What is their body of work? What is their artist statement? How is it that they're being incorporated into this text, and how is that going to be helpful? So I would look that person up. That's a great source to have. I can look up that person's website. That's a great source to have. I can look up a review of that person's artwork. That's a great source to have. It may not help me write the paper, but it is giving me some angles into the text. I can also, right, as pretty obvious within the same space, I can look up what Jim Crow is. What is the history of Jim Crow? Where does it first come from? Where do we first see it? What's the background leading up to Jim Crow? So I can go into all of this direction over to this side, and then I can bring it all the way back out into the very specific image in here. And that's just one image that I could do. There's multiple names that are used. There are references in this book to YouTube stars. So all of this is stuff that you can go and find because she's referencing them. So that you're making allusions to them. So the idea would be if you were teaching this book to somebody and you were able to say, hey, look at these allusions and references, they might get a better sense of what the book's trying to do as a whole. And then the bigger thing is about ideas, about the ideas the book presents. So instead of looking up specific examples mentioned like Hennessy Young Man and Serena Williams with both appearance out of the text, we look for qualified information on the psychology of racism in athletes, the historical self. So in other words, we're not just saying like, I'm going to look at this one thing, right, this one instance. I'm actually going to try to get to the psychology of things, like the sociological impact of things. So oftentimes, these particular sources have absolutely nothing to do with the book, right? So nobody's writing these articles to help explain the book Citizen. They're writing them to explain like the structure of something that has nothing to do with the book directly. You find those sources, though, through your intelligent reading of the text, looking for ideas, and you apply them to this book. And that's really where excellent writing takes place. You're saying that I'm taking one step further into this. I'm gonna try to find some connections that maybe somebody else doesn't see, and I'm gonna find those, and I'm gonna make an argument about them. That's where A papers come from. You only write with author bio and background, you're looking at like a C paper. You start incorporating those references and allusions, you're working into that B space. When you get into those ideas, that's you saying, no, I've done the work, trust me. There are plenty other places that you can look for source material, and we can talk more about that one. This is a very brief video about a relatively complicated idea. I'm going to show you an example of one before I quit, though. But you have to have 15 sources from a variety of perspectives. So you need 15 by the end of the semester, okay? And you're going to have to annotate a number of those. I'm thinking 8. that you would be using theoretically. So I'll talk about that in more detail. Don't use Wikipedia, work with the databases. I'm going to show you an example here of what an example of a enumerative bibliography actually looks like. This is from a student from last semester. I have taken out her name, but this was in 260, another course that I teach, an enumerative bibliography. So if you'll notice here, same structure as always. I don't need a word count for this one. She gave it the title here. So I had asked them to find different primary sources, short story, okay, a play, and down here is a theory and a film. So they had to find a total of 20 sources, 4 per source, for primary source. So this is what they look like, though. This whole thing is one citation, okay? You see the author's name here. You see the title, right? She's used an interview. It came from this source. It's a very reliable source, AWP, and this is when it was published. And of course, here's the URL that I could go and find it and double check her on, and then the date that she accessed it. So just basic information, total citation. And then the very next thing I see, arranged alphabetically by author, is the next source, right? And this one is at the limits of celebration of Lucille Clifton's poetry. Journal of Women's Studies, 2014, part of So in this space, she's gone from an interview, which is good, that can be helpful, to looking at somebody's more critical approach about celebration and the limits of celebration. So she's thinking now, the student who I'm reading here, I'm seeing that you're starting to come up with ideas, right? You're thinking, but they're still pretty specific to Clifton, but you're expanding, right? Just looking at like her bio. You're starting to think about somebody else writing about them critically. And then again, next one is this one. Hope in a Body. So then I have Lucille Clifton's eschatology, Christianity, and literature. So now I'm adding into a religious aspect, right? So she's now taking me into almost a separate area entirely. So I can see how this is growing here. And I have a pretty cool idea here with this. And then again, here I have another source coming from another valid place, self-writing, still about Lucille Clifton. And so in that space, one of my comments on, I apologize, one of my comments on this particular text that the student turned in was that I felt like this section was a little heavy on just Lucille Clifton. I wanted it to be a little bit outside of that. But in terms of that, it's really excellent. It's well prepared. The citations look correct. And then you'll see that they started over with the next one and did it again. Okay, and they do that for each and every one. So the main thing to remember with the enumerative bibliography is that yours will look different because you're only using one primary source, which is Claudia Rankine's Citizen. But they're ordered alphabetically by author or for the first word that appears, and you don't have to provide any information about them. You just have to present them cited correctly, and that gives me a chance to then interact with them. So this is what an enumerative bibliography will look like whenever you're done with it. A few pages of you going through the databases and finding some research. So I'm going to leave that there. And if you have any questions about what an enumerative bib is or what databases are, send me an email and I'll make sure that I get those started for you and we can walk you through that. So please be in contact and we'll go from there. Thank you very much.